I will now call on the President of our union to give a report. Maurie Mulheron is a principal of 10 years standing. His most recent school as principal was at Keira High School. He began his career down at Finley High School and is taught in substantial parts and times across New South Wales, but in southwest Sydney and Western Sydney in particular. Maurie, if you would come to the microphone, please.
Colleagues, today the teaching profession is meeting across New South Wales at meetings in regional and rural cities and here at Town Hall. And I've just heard in my own patch, Wollongong, Town Hall is packed to capacity. Today, the teaching profession is taking protest action in support of learning opportunities of our students. Today, teachers and principals are expressing the deep fears they hold for the future of public education. Today, the teaching profession is sending one clear message to the government, a message contained in the preamble to the Putting Students First Charter, that all educational change should be centred on the educational needs of our students. Our first priorities in this campaign, our first three priorities are students, students and students. And let's contrast this with the government's professed priorities: cuts, budgets and accountants. It was last September, and it was the State Treasurer, Mike Baird, who first announced the government policy of local schools, local decisions in his budget speech as an example of economic and fiscal reform. It was an honest statement. He made it clear. It's about economics, not education. It's about dollars, not students. But ever since, we've had the Minister for Education and the Premier scrambling in an attempt to sell it as education reform. In the same budget last year, the Treasurer also announced that he would cut the public sector spending by $10 billion and abolish 5,000 public service positions. But he complained that there was no structure, there was no mechanism to achieve the cuts and the so-called efficiency targets. Local schools, local decisions is the mechanism that Treasury has created. Local schools, local decisions is a marketing term designed to sell an agenda which will see the removal of all guarantees around the staffing of our schools. Currently, each public school is given a staffing entitlement. Entitlement, that's the official word. Remember that word. The staffing entitlement is based on the number of enrolments plus curriculum and learning needs. In other words, student needs underpin the staffing levels in our schools. That entitlement is the government guarantee to each public school community. For years, this system has infuriated Treasury officials. They've always wanted to reduce the number of people employed in the system, but we're stymied by a staffing formula that was enrolment driven and underpinned by class sizes protected by law. Indeed, in years gone by, ministers of education have been able to fend off Treasury by explaining that enrolments drive the number of positions. But finally, Treasury have found a minister who is prepared to give Treasury their way. The government is planning to remove the staffing entitlement and replacing it with a staffing budget, a bucket of money, from which principals will have to employ all staff, teaching and support staff. There's only one reason why a government wants to use dollars and not students as the basis for staffing schools. they intend to control very tightly how much goes into that staffing bucket. The gamble for parents, principals and teachers is this: will that staffing budget always keep pace with student needs and enrolments? Will it keep pace with inflation? Will it indeed grow? Or will the staffing budget shrink over time? Now recall the $10 billion that the Treasurer has started cutting from the state budget over the next 4 years. Will that staffing budget keep pace? Will it grow or will it shrink? That's the gamble. That's the uncertainty being built into the system. A few months ago, I was at a Gonski forum run by Deloitte in Sydney. When the discussion about school autonomy was raised, a senior accountant stood up and made one very short contribution. This is what he said: as an economist, when I hear school autonomy and flexibility, I hear uncertainty. He sat down, he had warned us all. And the uncertainty around staffing goes even further. The department has confirmed that the only allocated positions in any school in the future will be principal and classroom teacher. There'll be no mandated executive positions such as assistant principal, deputy or head teacher, and no mandated specialist positions such as counsellor, teacher librarian, support teacher and so on. Only principal and classroom teacher. All positions will be determined by how much money is available in the staffing budget. A school staffing entitlement is the number of permanent positions in a school. The department is planning to allow schools, indeed force schools, when a permanent position has become vacant, to have it filled indefinitely by a casual teacher employed on a temporary engagement basis. Why? Well, let's see how Honest Mike, the Treasurer, explains it, as heard on ABC radio recently. This is what he said. That's why we've given the discretion to the Directors Generals. We've reduced the labour expense cap and said, OK, well, it's up to you. So whether Director Generals are more creative with the way or more disciplined with the way they use temporary staff, with a management structure that actually takes advantage of that. He made it abundantly clear. Well, not very clear, actually. So I'm going to have to paraphrase. Director Generals are to use temporary staff as a means of meeting their efficiency savings. And what effect has devolution had on temporary levels in other states? In Victoria, the major change in staffing profile arising from the implementation of staffing budgets has been the increase in non-permanent employment of teachers in their first 5 years of teaching, so that now over 50% of teachers in their first 5 years are in non-permanent positions. In Western Australia, in the 200-odd schools involved in the Independent Public Schools Autonomy Trial, 47% of teachers are employed on short-term temporary engagements. Here in New South Wales, during the 47-school trial, 171 permanent positions were filled by temporary teachers, about 3.6 per school. If multiplied by 2,200 schools across the system, that would be 8,000 permanent positions lost. 8,000. Now remember that the secret department commissioned Boston Consultancy Expenditure Review report argued that compared to Victoria, New South Wales was overstaffed by around 7,500 permanent positions. You can see what their target is. And the 47-school trial actually is cited as evidence of enormous success for school autonomy. Yet during the life of the trial, 20 of the 47 schools involved lost both enrolments and staffing entitlements. Class sizes are under threat. The Minister talks of no changes to the class size policy. But class sizes are not in a policy. They are written into a legally enforceable staffing agreement that expires at the end of term 3. And the danger is this: The New South Wales State Commission of Audit, on page 83, declares that it will be no longer permissible in New South Wales to have staff ratios written into industrial agreements. Teacher-pupil ratios is the first example they use. Instead, the Commission of Audit argues that all staff ratios are to be determined by managerial prerogative. And in his recent budget speech on June the 12th, as recent as June the 12th, the Treasurer has committed the government to implement the Commission of Audit findings. At a time when we need to recruit the greatest number of young people into the teaching profession, it would be hard to find a worse policy mix than what the government is planning. A freeze on professional salaries, the casualisation of the teaching workforce, loss of executive positions and therefore career advancement opportunities, and the weakening of a service transfer system which will affect difficult to staff areas. If I could turn to every school, every student, another marketing term, this policy is another Treasury creation and in effect an element of local schools, local decisions, which will reduce support to some of our most vulnerable students. Rather than focusing on individual student needs, every school, every student, or every student, every school, I keep getting them back to front, provides funding on the basis of a measure of community prevalence. Clearly, this artificial measure fails to reflect actual need. It is nothing more than an accounting device. That's all it is. It's not a special education policy, it's an accounting device that the state government is using to deliver some of the efficiency savings required by the New South Wales Treasury. The cuts include schools reading and language classes, early support programs, as well as learning support officers and specialist teacher support. Since the May 18th stop work, there have been other serious developments. If there are any doubts as to the true intentions of the government under local schools and local decisions, two events since May 18 should dispel them. Firstly, on May 30th, the Department of Education, without warning, without consultation, and in the absence of even a pretense of negotiation, announced as part of local schools, local decisions, a radical restructuring of the department. It was called, we were told, a functional realignment. A functional realignment. I kid you not, the Deputy Director General, Greg Pryor, sat opposite us, and I commend him for keeping a straight face, and called it a functional realignment to create a better line of sights for principals. Line of sight. I had visions of an assassin watching his target through the crosshairs. And after nearly 10 minutes of this brain-numbing managerial speak, I said, Mr. Pryor, I haven't understood one word you have said. Not one word. How many positions are being cut? Which directorates are you abolishing? That's what we've come down to find out. That's actually what we were told that would be relayed to us at another point. But functional realignment indeed. The department has been gutted. Let's call it for what it is. It amounts to easily the most severe and significant loss of positions from head office in the history of public education. The cuts are deep and go to almost every aspect of support for schools and their students. It must be noted that, like all aspects of local schools and local decisions, the DEC is attempting to keep hidden any information on which directorates, which positions and which programs have been cut. The total number of positions lost initially to date is around 200, comprising 125 teachers and 75 support staff positions. The areas hit include the loss of the Curriculum Directorate. We have a Department of Education that no longer has a Curriculum Directorate. And perhaps we ought to start calling it the Department of Commerce. The loss of the Curriculum Directorate, the abolition of all positions currently supporting new scheme teachers, the abandonment of the regional new arrivals ESL program, the closure of the drug prevention unit, the loss of professional learning support, as well as a range of other critical programs in student welfare, the arts unit and library services. The Equity Programs Directorate, which coordinated funding and support for low SES schools, has gone. Now, the second event that confirms the state government's intent on savaging the funding of public education at the state level is the June 12th state budget. On top of the 5,000 public service positions that last year's budget announced as cuts, the Treasurer announced that a further 10,000 positions, 10,000, that's 15,000 now in total, are to go. The Department of Education now has to reduce its workforce even further. And among those hardest hit will be support staff in state, regional offices, and yes, in schools. Among the 15,000 that will be targeted will be thousands of department positions which currently exist to support principals, staff, and students. But the work will not disappear, merely pushed down to schools. A Labor expense cap of 1.2% has also been introduced across the whole of government, and the Director General of all departments must now reduce its permanent workforce. TAFE teachers and support staff will be the first affected. Given that the government is committed to putting dollars first, the Federation launched the Putting Students First Charter. It's a simple document and asks the government to commit to the guarantees around class sizes, staffing and funding levels, permanency and levels of specialist and executive staff. To date, the Minister has declined to sign the Charter. Please read it and ask what is contained within that Charter that would have a minister balk at endorsing it. Where is the controversy in the Charter? Any settlement of this dispute must be around real, tangible guarantees. We want the government to focus on student needs rather than meaningless, abstract concepts like principals' autonomy that will in reality be a recurring exercise in deciding what to do without. We want real commitments that are enforceable. We want educational reform that is shaped by the profession and based on student needs. We are tired of the policies, not to mention the emails from the department that could easily be described as a form of psychological and emotional abuse. We're tired of the pronouncements that are filled with managerial claptrap and jargon, sick of the cliches like one size doesn't fit all. We are tired of the deceit, tired of the weasel words, the secrecy and the obfuscation. We want a Department of Education and a minister who's prepared to stand up and defend the public education system from a vicious, ideologically driven group of economic fundamentalists that populate the Treasury and the Department of Finance. It is time, colleagues, it is time. It is time for PricewaterhouseCoopers and their accountants to leave the department building in Bridge Street to go back to their day job of corporate raiders, and for the teaching profession of New South Wales to be allowed to sit at the tables in the chairs they vacate. Then, and only then, will we get genuine, sustained and real education reform in this state.